But on the plus side, I might be able to get a haircut next week. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy and this is Reviews. Today I bring you my July wrap-up part 2. Let's just get into it because there are lots of books to talk about. Okay, so first I have an essay collection, White Girls by Hilton discussing very specific US pop culture and its relationship to race and queerness. Oh, and also gender. I really like that part. I wasn't expecting such a strong gender component, and I really enjoyed that. These are very experimental in a way. There are a multiplicity of voices that are not always the author, and that worked sometimes, and sometimes it didn't. Some of the essays were overtly long and could have been much shorter and would have been much stronger. They are very all over the place and they are very conversational in a way that feels like someone is going on and on. And particular essays that I really enjoyed are Philosophy or Dog, in which he discusses Malcolm X's autobiography, but also the figure of his mother in his life and the absence of that figure in the public narrative. Then White Noise, which is about Eminem, and then Michael, which is about Michael Jackson. So you see, weirdly enough, although I was a bit taken aback by how culture specific this was, my favorite essays were ones that were very culture specific. Maybe because the scope was narrower and so it really got to the point, but there are others that are 70 pages long and they have such strong moments, but no essay needs to be 70 pages long. I don't care what it is, it just doesn't need to be. It feels very self-indulgent. And I think the ideas are so good. I think his analysis actually is amazing. He's clearly a very smart person. It's just that the essays themselves felt a little gimmicky at times and felt too long and they needed a stronger editorial hand. I would recommend this, especially if you're very into US American culture. If you're going to read a 20 to 70 page essay set in a context that you can absolutely not relate to and you're not getting it, then you will probably be very frustrated with this book. Definitely didn't love it as much as I expected to. A collection of essays that I did love was Treasure Palace, Great Writers Visit Great Museums, edited by Maggie Fergusson with a foreword by Nikolai. It's an anthology actually, of course not a collection, and I loved it. This has a really strong list of names. Even if you don't like them or don't read them, you will know them, like Roddy Doyle, Julian Barnes, Alan Hollinghurst, and also Alice Smith. And you can really tell the experience in them because they are not trying to do too much. And some of them describe the museum more or describe the context more. Some of them put more of their personal history in there, but all of them wrap them up really nicely. There were some that I thought were not as strong, but overall, I think this is one of the strongest essay anthologies I've ever read. I definitely recommend this. This is more museum-centered, so it might not satisfy your travel needs, but because I am a museum nerd, this made me ache so much. Anyways, let's move on to some contemporaries. So I finally did read Matilda by Royaldale. I love this. I can see how reading this as a child would make you so happy, like would give you such a sense of justice in the world, but also as an adult it's so dark and yeah, it's funny, it's really cleverly written. So this is about a little girl who discovers reading and she's kind of a child genius, but her family are complete ignorant TV worshippers and they're constantly belittling her, but then she has a very good teacher that discovers her genius and they work together to improve each other's lives. Then I have The Break by Pietro Grossi. This is translated from the Italian by Howard Curtis, published by Pushkin Press. If you read translated fiction, you know Pushkin Press has this amazing catalog and their game is so freaking strong. I really appreciate their design choices and how they craft books that feel so good in your hand. That's beside the point, but I just really want to highlight that, especially because we are in Women in Translation Month and they've been releasing £1, I think, ebooks through Amazon, which, you know, it's not great, but at least they are trying to, you know, promote reading women in translation. So each day they make for that day that ebook available. Go check out their Twitter page. I'll link it down below. Okay, this is about a worker who works paving streets, but not with like gravel pavement, with stones. I think it's like cobble. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Please educate me. He has like a very normal life. His one hobby is playing a specific type of billiard that they explain in the introduction, or not the introduction, but oh yeah, translator's note. That's great because the break refers to that first opening in that game of billiard. He finds out that his wife is pregnant, and that is the first of many events that are both fortunate and unfortunate. He has this billiard Mr. Miyagi figure, this typical hermit, crabby man who supposedly was great in the past. It's just so quietly fascinating if you like Hemingway's subtlety. But you also like things with a bit more spark, where things get a bit crazier, a bit more absurd. I think this is a great book to read. It sort of reflects about one's daily life and whether that amounts to anything or not, whether you should always play by the rules or not. And it does so with such humor. The character is such an everyman. At the same time, he carries the novel so well, in part because of what he thinks, in part of how he interacts with other people, and his determination to befriend this master figure and to understand the game and how the game relates to life, but also as an end onto itself, because it's basically what the protagonist likes to do every day. I think it's great. This was a recommendation by a fabulous bookseller at Mr. B's Emporium of Reading Delights in Bath. It took me like 3 years to get to it. I'm sorry, but thank you, thank you, thank you. Moving on to the classics, let's just start with A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the first in the series order of the Sherlock Holmes saga, wherein Dr. John Watson meets Sherlock Holmes and they become best buds for life. This was super cool up to a certain point. I think I said this in my May wrap up when I talked about the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, about how much of the delight in the narration is just how Watson is taken by it all. He is constantly astonished and he's so clever too, but of course in a very different way, and he's so ready to admit how great or interesting he finds Sherlock. I liked at the beginning where he's trying to figure out Sherlock Holmes and he's writing the knowledge that Sherlock has and the amount of it. I think that was my favorite part, and he's just like, literature next to nothing. Oh, here it is. Astronomy, nihil. Politics, feeble. That's the word he uses. Botany, variable. Anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. I just really love that. That said, this has a big tangent, and it's about Mormons in Utah. It goes full Western. I buddy read this with Amelia from Amelia Reads and Natalie from A Curious Reader, and I link their platforms down below. But basically for them it was a reread, and because of that they were able to really enjoy the part of the Mormons. It really provides a backstory for the murder that they have to solve in A Study in Scarlet. I didn't like that. Imagine you're so into the narrative and then a completely different narrative stays there for 6 whole chapters. 6 whole chapters, and you're just there. I just couldn't enjoy it at all. I was just there reading and hoping it would get back to Sherlock and Watson. Maybe that would change upon reread. I don't know. I just think you should be aware of that. I didn't enjoy that part at all. I enjoyed the story overall. I would reread it, but nothing can guarantee me or anyone watching this video that I would reread those chapters. Then let's get to Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol, a new translation by Richard Pevear and Larissa Volokhonsky. There are 2 ways you can read this. The first way is read only the first part, which was published in Gogol's time, or you can read the whole thing, which includes the manuscript for the second part, which, if I'm not mistaken, Gogol wrote like 3 different times and burned them. There is something that you need to know before getting to this novel that I wish I had known, and maybe I should have Googled. I thought it would be explained in the notes, or I don't know, it just didn't occur to me. But basically, at the time this is set in Russia, there was this landowning system where the landowner was responsible for all the peasants that lived in their land, and even when they were dead, they had to be responsible for them, and they were like taxed or received tax. So the main character of this, what he wants to do is to buy off all the dead souls, so souls that are nominally part of the land, and set up his own land and do some kind of scheme with the government. I only found that out because one of my friends on Goodreads, on their review, put all of the explanation, a much better explanation. I would link it, but it's in Spanish. I'm sure you can find something similar in English. I wish I had known that when I went to read the introduction. That wasn't explained either. The introduction was really cool, but it was more about the production of Dead Souls. I'll get into that in a minute, and the language, which is hilarious because it has a 3-page translator's note on names, which was very helpful. Don't get me wrong. I learned a lot and I appreciated it. And they also talked about ranks in the army system. But a little historical context, and I know you can just Google, but the point was that I didn't know I was looking for that until I had read it and I found out. I didn't want to Google more context to Dead Souls because I was afraid of spoilers, so it's a real conundrum. Now you know, in case you want to know. I mean, I still got that the protagonist wanted to do some sort of scheme and he was finding it difficult, but I didn't exactly know what was going on, really, until I read this review and I was like, oh, okay, now I get more things. I still enjoyed this because it is great. It is really, really well written. Well, the translation was also really good. It's very funny. So the point is that the protagonist thinks this will be easy money, because why would people want to hang on to these dead souls, right? But the thing is that people are absurd and find this scheme very strange and don't understand why he would want to buy them. It's actually much harder than he thinks. Tonally, it's very similar to old epic wandering stories. So even if you think of like Don Quixote, right? That idea of going out to a quest and listening to these stories and these people's backgrounds and the framed narrative in a way, it's very enjoyable to read, but I think I would have appreciated the context. Moving on, I read Maurice by Ian Forster. This is my first Forster, and I liked it fine. I didn't love it. This is about Maurice, who is a young man. It follows him actually from childhood. He's gay. He realizes this quite early on. By the time he's in Oxford, he definitely knows, but of course he's not very comfortable with his sexuality. You know, this was written in the 1920s, I think. Was completed in 1914. There he meets Clive, who is this very Uranian, Greek love type of Oxford student. There were a few, including my bae, Oscar. This was post-Wild, which I think was very interesting. I mean, if you think about it, it's only about 20 years after, if I'm not mistaken. Very much a presence there. What I didn't enjoy as much was the pacing. I think the pacing was a bit off, honestly. This was published posthumously per Forster's wishes. He was about to publish it a bunch of times, but he never had the strength. Of course, when he finished the novel, it was very much illegal. But he did live until the 70s, which was after a lot of things had happened and a lot of LGBT plus authors had published by then. So that's a really interesting discussion to have, that he still chose to not publish it because he was very obsessed with his own image. Something that's so well explored here, the ideas of class and respectability in a time of transformation from the Victorian era to this more modern society. Now that I'm talking about it, I think it stayed with me more than I thought, but while I was reading it, I was very aware that the writing itself wasn't what I was expecting, perhaps because I had the highest expectations. But I do think that has to do with Forster's struggling with the subject, I think that you can totally see the struggle. It feels like it doesn't flow, and maybe because he made so many revisions, I don't know, there's something unfinished or like that doesn't quite work about the narrative. That said, I did really feel for the characters. Also, this is something Maurice is famous for, very explicit kissing and like affection, even in contemporary, specifically male homosexual fiction. The issue of intimacy and tenderness is such a big theme that to see it reflected here was fascinating. So yeah, it was interesting. Not my favorite. I could see the potential. It's just that maybe the topic was too close to home, and then his observational skills in other stories will be fascinating. So looking forward to Howard's End especially, and A Room with a View. Although I didn't get to her poetry collection, I did end up reading The Belgian by Sylvia Plath, and I love this. As someone who growing up read so many coming of age stories where the protagonists were men, and I really identified with a very male voice, I wish I would have read this for the first time when I was 15 or 16. This is about Esther. She's 19. She is in New York doing an internship for a magazine because she wants to be a writer, and she's actually very talented, but then suddenly depression sinks in. So the Belgian is actually a metaphor for how this descends upon your head and everything around you is dulled and distorted. I found that metaphor so powerful and so accurate. The prose is amazing. She is, of course, very personal and it gets very emotional, but it's also, she conveys this detached tone so well. Although it's very personal, this is very autobiographical. At the same time, it's handled with clinical precision. So it's not self-indulgent. Every scene has significance. The book is basically divided into two sections: her time in New York and also her time in a mental institution. And the time in New York also includes a lot of commentary in terms of class, but also a lot of discussions around gender, how women can exercise their sexuality as power, but also why is that the only tool women have. The narrator has all these crazy ideas that to her make perfect sense about how to relate to men and how to approach dating, and she doesn't really know to relate to other women, so there's the theme of lack of connection, which in part is because of her depression, but it's also because her youth and because of the way she was raised. She is not from New York, and so this is a whole new social environment for her. She's also thinking about her future, but because of depression, she no longer has the energy or the brain space to think about it. So all these modern themes, it's just such a great book. Please read it if you haven't yet. I know it's compulsory reading in a lot of schools. Here, not so much. A lot of people are reading it now because this has had, I think, a real comeback amongst our generation. I think because it is so relatable, but it's also just really well done. You know, themes are very, very important, but how they're written, it's also important, and I think this also excels at that. So yes, one of the best books I've read this year, and possibly in my entire life. And finally, let's get to Jane Austen July. Technically, I completed 2 challenges. I read one of the main novels and 2 non-main novels. So this is The Beautiful Cassandra, and this is a collection of Austen's juvenilia. I don't know if this is her entire juvenilia or just a selection, but this was fun. You can see her wit and you can see her humor behind it, but also you need to bear in mind that these not only were not meant for publication, most of them, but they were meant to be read to her family. I can really imagine these read out loud, and you can tell they are meant to produce the most comedic effect. So they are not as great as Austen's other work, but you can see the author she will become, and also you'll just find it hilarious. If you love Jane Austen, you can't not read this. Then I have a bind-up of Persuasion and Lady Susan in this beautiful heirloom collection. So I badly read this with Dani. I will leave her bookstagram down below. She takes really, really beautiful pictures. We both felt very lukewarm about this. So this is about Anne, who had a romance with I don't even remember, a captain. They fell out over a misunderstanding, and yeah, I liked the he said she said aspect of this. I think those moments where Austen at her sassiest were the most fun and the most engaging, and there was the tension, but I just didn't care. I didn't care about Anne. I cared about her relationship to other people. So like, she has a really tense, hilarious relationship with her sister, and I thought that was very interesting. I thought that part was good, and the last chapter I really appreciated. But because I wasn't interested in Anne, I just couldn't get into the rest of the plot. And I think I was especially disappointed because I had just read Lady Susan, and Lady Susan was fantastic. One of my favorite Austens. It's so great. It's so sassy. It's an epistolary novel about this widow who is very controlling and very manipulative, and she's just a wicked, wicked woman. And it's, I think, the only of Austen's protagonists who's like that. I mean, I haven't read Mansfield Park, but I think Fanny Price is very well known for her moral integrity. Lady Susan definitely isn't. And it's so amazing because you get the collection of letters, and so you can totally tell how she changes from one person to another and her different personas, but you can also tell the two-facedness of other people apart from Lady Susan. It's very short but very effective. I love epistolary novels, but they are very hard to do right because they need to feel natural, like these are things that people would actually tell each other, and at the same time you need to get enough information to distinguish whether what these people are writing is true or not. Kudos to Austen. I mean, she did it again. This has been more than half an hour of me talking to my cell phone. I am not looking forward to editing it, but I am looking forward to your comments and just reading whether you read these books. Did you enjoy them? Are you planning on picking up any of these books after I talked about them? Do let me know. So yeah, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe and comment and share. See you next time.